All right, then. Well, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Samantha Berg, and I'm a managing partner at Next Street, a mission-based firm that's focused on mobilizing capital, customers, and capabilities to small businesses. Before we get started, I just wanted to give you a couple of housekeeping tips. First of all, this webinar is being recorded. We do have everybody on mute by default, and we love questions. So if you can submit your questions using the Q&A function, we'll try to get to as many questions as possible. We also received some questions as part of the Eventbrite, and we will be getting to those questions at the end of the conversation if we haven't addressed them during the conversation. So before we get started with the official presentation or discussion rather, I would like to do a poll just to find out what you're excited about today and what you want to learn from this conversation. So if we can kick up the poll, that would be great. Fantastic. All right, we have some really interesting responses. So I see that we have 57% trying to understand common mistakes and challenges. We have 46% increasing distribution with major retailers, 32% for both strengthening negotiation leverage with retailers, as well as managing relationship with retailers, 25% for financing, 29% for how to prepare for future growth, and then 25% for managing growth. So thank you so much for your responses. We'll try to make this as interactive as possible. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our panelists today. We have two fabulous women joining us to talk about tips and resources for how to be successful when scaling growth with retailers. The first panelist that I'd like to introduce is Rachel Hersh. Rachel is the sales director for North America at Prestige Capital, an accounts receivable financing company. She has over 20 years experience as a finance executive and has a successful track record of working with a range of companies, from startups to high growth companies to turnarounds to increase their working capital. And then we have Vanessa Ting, a former senior buyer for Target and now fractional CMO in the beauty industry focused on growth and turnarounds. Vanessa develops marketing and sales strategies to help brands be successful online and in major retailers. And Vanessa, too, has a wealth of experience with over 20 years in consumer goods and retail. So we're going to start off today with Vanessa, and we're going to cover the big question that everybody wants to know here. What do target buyers look for when evaluating brands? Vanessa, take it away.
Thanks, Sam, and thank you guys all for having me. Okay, so what do target buyers look for? Truthfully, it's the same across all major retailers as well as smaller retailers. You just have, these different retailers place emphasis on different areas. But there are really just three things that retail buyers look for when evaluating a brand. I'll go into them in a little bit more detail, but just to give you a high level summary, number one is sales traction, right? What is your sales traction? Number two, what are the marketing programs that you are going to be implementing to drive awareness of your brand as well as demand? And three, vendor execution. How strong of an executor is your company? Will you deliver products, in the right time and the right place, right? So those are the three kind of broad buckets: sales, marketing, and vendor execution. So just to dive into each one of them super quickly, I'm known for not being brief, so probably won't be quick. But sales, right? At the end of the day, retailers are in the business of making money, and they want to know that the products that they're bringing into their stores are going to drive sales for them, right? And incremental sales. Right? Not sales that are going to take away from existing products on their shelf, but truly incremental sales that will help them grow their assortment. And the best way for them to measure your sales potential in their stores is to see what your sales traction is elsewhere, in whether it's online on your DTC Shopify site, or maybe it's in another retailer similar in stature and size to the retailer that you're pitching to, right? But they just want to see those data points, sales growth, velocity, things like that to help them understand what potentially the sales potential will be in their stores. And it's also really helpful to tell them what types of retailers you're currently working with, because that also gives them a good sense of whether you're ready for that particular retailer. The second thing, marketing, is, the way to think about it is marketing to a retailer is like an insurance policy. It's insurance that your product is going to sell on shelf, that your brand's going to sell on shelf. So they want to know that you are doing both out of store marketing and in-store marketing, right? So out of store marketing is everything that you're doing already to maybe drive sales to your website. It's the marketing you're doing already to get brand awareness. So it's PR, it's the review sites that are a testament to the quality of your product. It's social media, both organic and paid. So it's everything you're doing right now, but also, with a thought that as more people are aware of your brand, demand increases, and then when your brand launches in this retailer store, they know that this audience will be ripe for this store. And then also they want to see that you're doing in-store marketing, right? So not only are you doing things out of store to drive traffic into stores, but what are you doing in the store to capture conversion? Are you doing temporary price cuts? Are you going to put together a program in store, working with the retailer to ensure that sales are moving on shelf? So that in a nutshell is kind of what they're looking for when evaluating your brand. They're evaluating also your marketing plan. And then finally, vendor execution, which is kind of a broad bucket, but basically they want to make sure that when they're partnering with you, that you're a good business partner, right? You're understanding everything about the supply chain of that retailer and making sure that your products are all getting delivered to the right place in the right quantities on the right day. At the end of the day, if a retailer if the product is late and you've got an empty shelf, they're not selling anything, and that to them is a huge risk. So, are you a good partner? Are you reliable? Can you deliver? And then when you communicate with them, are you building a great relationship, right? Do you understand their needs? Do you understand that the buyer is trying to grow sales for the entire category, not just your brand, right? So you can't just be there talking about how great your brand is. You need to talk about it in the context of how you're helping the buyer grow their overall assortment. So those are really broad strokes, and you'll hear more of these kind of details, I'm sure throughout this chat, but at least that's a nice kind of foundation for us to start with.
Awesome. So sales, marketing, and vendor execution. Let's move on to something that I know we've received a number of questions on, which is cold calling or cold emailing, right? And what do you say? So now that you have the foundations of what you need to do, what do you need to say when you're reaching out to retail contacts?
So when you're reaching out to retailers, you really want to again, I think, and I might be repeating myself here, but you definitely want to talk about some of the retailers you're currently in. So, as a buyer, when someone told me, I'm in mom and pop store, I was like, well, okay. I mean, that's not really telling me that, you're ready for my store. But if I'm a Target buyer and you're telling me you're selling really well at CVS or selling really well at Walmart, or selling really well in Anthropologie because, maybe you're a beauty brand, that will get my attention. Because I would much prefer these, retailers be the guinea pig, but these are also really, appealing competitors of my store. So that is most definitely, one way to really capture their attention right out the bat. I think other than that, it's also talking to them about your velocity. How are you currently moving in stores? The common metric is units per store per week in many cases, or maybe it's unit per store per foot. But showing that you are highly productive as a SKU is really also important in getting their attention, because now you're speaking in their terms, in their kind of vernacular. So those are just a few other things to really capture the attention of a buyer. Ultimately, it comes down to FOMO. You want to create FOMO. And so these are the
Awesome. So let's say you get that introductory call with the major retailer. What are some of the questions that you think are important to ask if you have this hot product?
Yeah, so guys, ask questions. It is not a one-way kind of conversation where they're asking you questions and you're just answering and presenting, and it's definitely a dialogue. Ask them questions. I think it doing so does two things. One, it shows them that you are knowledgeable about the world of retail, so you know what questions to ask. And secondly, it helps you be better prepared for the next step of the conversation. It'll help you with negotiations. So, what are some questions to ask? Right off the bat, my favorite question is to ask, what are your margin expectations? Every retailer has a benchmark or a range that they're always shooting for. Ask them for it. They want you to ask them for it, because then it saves everyone time. If you can't hit those margin expectations, they know that you'll self-slut yourself out perhaps. Or, now that you know what the expectations are, you can now see if it can work, and then the conversation can continue. Also ask them, what are your velocity expectations, right? So again, back to that units per store per week measure that we talked about. Ask them, what is your category average, or what would you expect for a brand like ours? What do we need to do to be successful? Because that also, that tells you not only, what you're aiming for once you're in stores, it also helps you assess, can I do that right now? Based on what I know of our velocity in current stores, are we ready for that? And then other questions to ask are, what are the other additional fees that typically are expected of us? Is there co-op marketing fees that will also need to kick in? What are your marketing expectations in that regard? So yeah, those are generally kind of the questions to ask right off the bat. I mean, yes, you want to be assertive and ask questions, but you don't also want to interrogate them. So, it's a fine balance.
Thank you. I do want to remind our listeners to ask questions in the Q&A before we get to the next section of our conversation, which is going to bring in Rachel. We're going to talk about pricing a little bit and take a detour because you want to figure out how you can price your products correctly for wholesale. So I guess let's start, Vanessa, with you, and then we'll get to Rachel on the pricing front. What costs do they need to consider when they're looking at pricing?
Yep, absolutely. So when you guys are presenting your pricing to a retailer, there are different ways in which you can show it. More simply, you can show delivered pricing or, FOB pricing. Delivered pricing is the cost of your product when it is delivered to their warehouse. So that includes your outbound freight. FOB pricing is when the retailer comes and picks up from your warehouse. So you don't have to cover the cost of freight. It's, your cost is based on everything that it takes to get your pallet, pushed out into the dock. So that's the first thing to really clarify with the retailer. What kind of pricing do you want from me? Delivered or FOB pricing? And then after you know that, start looking at, when you're trying to figure out whether or not it's viable to work with this retailer or not, look at what obviously your COGS are and kind of, your overall margin targets are for your company, but also consider that, you'll have to, the cost of doing business with this retailer will include, markdowns, returns and damages, co-op marketing. You might have a broker that takes a 5% commission, so you want to account for that as well. You of course want to account for the retailer's margins. You're going to ask them the question, what's your margin expectations? You're going to put that into your equation, and and you're also going to think about cash discounts, like the 2% discount that sometimes you give when you get paid sooner. So, there are industry numbers for some of these things. Sometimes co-op marketing can be anywhere from 5 to 10%. Returns and damages can be around 2%. Markdowns are really hard to estimate because it varies widely, but markdowns is you paying when the retailer takes puts your product on sale. So if there's a 10% sale, discount promotion happening, you basically pay the delta, the 10%. And you can negotiate that. You can negotiate, you pay only 50 of it. So, that's a little bit harder to estimate, but it is a negotiating point that you should absolutely negotiate on. So those are just some kind of guidelines and tips on kind of really roughly how to think about pricing. Because I see, a very, very common mistake being that you don't ask the right questions, or you don't make you don't assume everything in the wholesale cost you give your retailer, and then you end up finding out it's more expensive to fulfill that order and work with that retailer than you thought. And then, what you thought was maybe a 50% margin is now, a 20, and it sucks.
Thank you. Rachel, I want to give you a chance to respond to this question as well, because I assume that many of our listeners on this webinar are interested in whether financing should be a part of pricing. And how would you respond to that?
Absolutely. So, the product that we offer is accounts receivable financing, also known as invoice discount financing. And it's a powerful tool in growing a business. And it's also something that is not as well known as it should be. I speak to so many founders and entrepreneurs who think that they need to get equity to grow a business, and that without that, they cannot open doors whatsoever. And then they get introduced to me through, an advisor, an equity firm, or an accountant, an attorney, a banker. And, I explain to them that if you have a legitimate order from a retailer, you can literally walk in our door with that purchase order, and if you have some kind of volume that we can work with, then we will, finance your invoice. And if you need somebody to finance your purchase order, we will actually introduce you to one of our partners who finances the overseas supplier with a letter of credit in order to release the product. And that service basically works like this. Your overseas supplier receives a letter of credit from the purchase order finance partner. They then let the goods leave. It comes by boat or by plane, and it ships to the retailer. Prestige Capital buys that invoice, and then it's our job to pay back the purchase order finance company for the money that they have laid out, including their fees. So you need to have enough of a gross profit margin that I can do that in my advance rate. And when we advance funds on accounts receivables, we typically advance 75% of the receivable minus any net dilution that is known, advertising allowance, slotting fees, things of that nature. So I need to pay back the purchase order finance company that amount of money they've laid out plus their fees right away, or you have to come up with your own cash for the differential. And so that is if your product is being, produced overseas. If your product is a domestic product and you don't have terms with your manufacturer here in the United States, then we can work with our program, which is called our Factors Assurance Program. And what this program does is it allows your supplier to get paid by Prestige Capital when we purchase that invoice. We send them the money directly. So they're not waiting for Target to pay you and then for you to pay them. They only need to wait that short period of time from the time that you invoice Target, let's say, and then we fund the money to them. So in that example, using a Factors Assurance Program, one of our clients introduced us to her domestic supplier in California. And not only did he like the program, he now introduces clients to us. And that's the kind of partnership that we love, which is that there's just so many layers and components. Vanessa and I actually met through Dandy Day Collective, which is a conscious beauty company. And, I met Haley through my client, Lauren Francis, who has a product called Love Script. So there's this symbiosis of connection, education, what we know and how we can help one another. And this is part of the reason we're doing this event today is, Vanessa and I have information that we think is really helpful to people. And we know players in the field that can help in other little areas as well. And we have clients that might be helpful to each other. So it's really all about, the connection. As far as the invoice financing, we don't need to do the upfront money, because if you have terms with your supplier, then we can just finance the invoices. And so, if you have already shipped the product and you just have invoices that you want to sell us so that you have the liquidity to pay the supplier, then what we're doing is we buy the invoice, we give you the money, and then you pay your supplier. So very often the problem with selling to retail is, let's say you're going to get paid in 45 or 60 days, but you only have 15-day terms with your supplier. So what happens is you're afraid to actually go and approach the retailer and say, hey, I want to be in your store, because you cannot handle the growth, and maybe you can't get equity. And then you're like, okay, then I have to be this small brand and just wait. And the opposite is true. If you can actually ship the product and sell me an invoice, not only can you pay your supplier, you can pay fast and maybe even get a discount for paying early. So we had this with an early stage baby food company. They were introduced to me by their banker. They said, we want to be in Whole Foods, but when Whole Foods walks down the aisle of the fancy food show, we hide because we don't want the order because we don't know what to do. So I said, you don't have to hide, because you will get paid by us, within 24 hours or so after selling us the invoice. You can literally pay early and maybe get a discount. And so all of a sudden their orders are growing, not double, not triple, but 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times. And that's what we do. We give you this runway for growth. And I don't care if you have equity. You may have equity, but I don't care if you have equity. That's not the play. And as everybody knows, if you have sales, that's what an equity partner wants to know. How much have you sold already? And you can get a much better valuation, and you can, really keep a majority of your company and not give it away, because what you truly needed was transaction capital, not venture capital.
Thank you. We have had numerous questions come in, so I do want to pivot from sort of pricing and financing a little bit and just get back to some of the questions that we have come in, and then we'll continue on the conversation, bring you both into the fold. So the first question that we have is from Leah, and Vanessa, I think this is going to you. How do you find buyer contact information?
Yes, really good question. So it's all very scrappy. So assuming you don't have someone, making the introduction for you or slipping the email address to you, it is like brute force of Google searching. So the first thing to do is try and find the buyer's name. So either use LinkedIn, type in their job title, their category. Sometimes that works. And sometimes it doesn't. But a lot of buyers are, of course, especially in major retailers, are, always, conscious of their career. So they'll keep their LinkedIn profile updated, right? So, do not reach out to them on LinkedIn. That is like the surefire way to annoy them. Just get their email or get their name from LinkedIn, and then, knowing the domain of the retailer, you can either kind of guess what their email address is, or you can use things like Rocket Reach, or the many tools out there. I might be butchering the name, but there's many tools out there that you can use to type in the domain name, you type in the first and last name, and presto. So there's really no elegant way of doing it. There aren't very many lists that get that get passed around, and if they do, they could be quickly outdated, especially because buyers will change roles very quickly. So if someone comes to you and says, oh, I've got a list to buy for $500, maybe partner up with 10 of your best friends and buy it, but don't buy it outright, because it could very well be outdated information. So other than that, that's probably the easiest way of doing it. But above that, at the end of the day, retailers and retail buyers are also consumers, right? They're out there shopping. They're out there looking at what the trends are. They're following brands on Instagram. So as you go about your normal course of marketing and brand building, they will consume that information. If you're picked up in people.com or Refinery 29, they'll be reading those things as well. So, I mean, I think that there's no elegant way to it, but that's how you find their information. You can also work with sales brokers, right? So, every retailer has a set of sales brokers that they work with, and oftentimes those folks have relationships with the retail buyer. They also know exactly what the retail buyer's pain points are, what their growth objectives are. So they're a fantastic thought partner to bring along in the outreach journey. But yeah, it is not easy to find their information.
I want to get to a question that I think is relevant to both of you. An anonymous person has put in the question of how has the pandemic impacted retailers accepting new brands? And then conversely, I want Rachel, you to answer, how has the pandemic impacted financing? So if we can start with you, Vanessa, on the pandemic question, and then Rachel, I'd love for you to talk about pandemic and financing.
Yes, it has impacted retail buyers' decisions. Already, retail buyers are very risk averse. They come from a place of mitigating risk when making decisions. So with the pandemic having kind of upended consumer demand in some categories, demand is much higher than ever. In other places, it's dropped off. And, obviously, the world is so unpredictable. So it has made retail buyers a little less willing to bring in untested, unproven brands and vendors. They definitely rely more on sales traction and kind of those tangible data points in evaluating risk. And I think the other thing that has been really interesting is a lot of these retailers that are essential, especially like, mass retailers that, that don't sell food, that sell food, but don't only rely on food. A lot of the shopping shifted. Actually, I take that back. It has worked for grocers as well. A lot of the shopping has shifted online. So what that means is the margin has shifted within a store from a store profitability margin to a .com one. And their margins are less online than there are in stores. So what that means is now retailers are also mindful of that shift in profitability, and they're actually pushing harder now for vendors to give them better margins, because they now have to pay for this, increased cost of digital, product distribution. So those are kind of the two main ways things have changed.
Oh, we have seen so much change from the pandemic. I have a long list, but I'll kind of start with the first thing. When the stores closed and everybody was under lockdown, we had a consumer product company that was doing really big numbers with us, and they suddenly stopped sales. Yeah, they had Amazon, but they were brick and mortar sales, and home goods and things like that. And so their sales went like that. And what happened was, after some time, when retail opened, not only did they start selling again, but the retailer shelves were empty. And so when it came towards Christmas time, they literally said, every item you have sitting in your warehouse, we will take, because they needed to fill shelves because there was nothing on the shelf. So the numbers went way back up. So that was like one pretty interesting, story there. The other thing that we've seen is a tremendous growth in financing the personal protective equipment, like the masks. So one of our clients pivoted from a completely different business to sell masks, and he's on every shelf in CVS now. And that kind of pivot for us at Prestige, we don't look at financials, we don't look at tax returns, we don't care if you're profitable. We care who is buying your product. Is that company reputable? If I look at your background, is it clean? And can I have a first lien on your assets? That's our underwriting. We typically close deals in a week. All right. So this client was introduced to us by not one, but many sources, because when people are shopping for this financing, all roads lead to Prestige Capital. And, not only were we able to finance it and put these masks in CVS, you can see it everywhere, and the growth is there. The other thing that we definitely saw is an increase in buyers buying healthy foods, right? And things that were good for your immune system. So we have a number of clients that we onboarded early on in the pandemic that have products that are related to health. And those are the kind of clients that they want at their stores. So those are just kind of some of the top level stories. I'm sure some will come up and I will kind of raise my hand as I think of more. But there is definitely the pivot. There is definitely, oh, I know what it was. We have a lot of clients that are selling products that are COVID friendly. Like we had an arts and crafts kids company that, graduated a couple of years ago that came back because everybody's buying paint for their kids to play with. We did a very large deal with outdoor plants because everybody's gardening. We did a big toilet paper deal. We're just underwriting a deal right now, which is a all natural thing that is used with like gardening, for your plants. And they are getting orders from like a Lowe's.com or a HomeDepot.com, right? Because you may be sitting home and buying it through the internet, but Lowe's and Home Depot is the one that's actually paying your invoice. So, the consumer may be sitting home, but the corporation is buying it. And the corporation is, where the receivable is coming from. That client actually thought it was an e-commerce transaction. And we said, no, it's not, because you actually have a retailer who's the one buying the product. And again, gardening, anything with gardening and home and candles and skincare and, color, maybe like something to brighten up your face when you're on Zoom calls all day. Anything that feels luxurious, candles, things like that, those categories do well.
So I just want to confirm, Rachel, because you've talked about what's doing well, that companies still can access financing even during the pandemic. I know that's a big challenge for so many organizations.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is Prestige Capital is a 35-year-old company. We have survived and thrived in all kinds of economic situations, like 2008 when the banks completely dried up funding, like after 9/11. The pandemic is obviously a unique challenge because we have to figure out everything new. I mean, to how to run as a company and how to be remote and how to help our clients and all of that. But from the very beginning, we let our clients and our referral partners know, like, we are here. We have money. We will fund your client. They have to have the same criteria that they needed to have before. Invoices, a clean background, our ability to have a first lien or to work with your bank, and maybe they carve out certain invoices for us, because that sometimes happens, that a bank has a loan and then a client gets a really big order and they go to the bank and say, can you grow with me, and can you help me fund my overseas supplier? And the banker will say, not really, but we'll carve out Target, that debtor, for you to fill that order, or Costco, or whatever it may be. And we've done a lot of these very chunky one-off deals. I mean, we did a deal with one of our bank referral partners, a $25 million one-off deal from Amazon in the fourth quarter, because they didn't want to increase the line. It was coming in the year, and we were able to do that. So for us, the spigot is always open. We always have money. It's, do you qualify? And, and if you don't qualify right now, it doesn't mean you cannot be on our radar. I speak to a lot of companies that are like getting there. They may not be there yet. They just want really more knowledge and more information. So, our website, prestigecapital.com has tons and tons of information, but I'm also happy to speak to people now to kind of go high level and conceptualize with them, what do they need? Obviously after this conversation, I'm sure people will have more questions that they'll think of after, and they can absolutely reach out to us. But yes, we have money. We would love to work with companies and fund them. And again, they don't need to be in business a particular amount of time. They have to have sales or they have to have orders.
So I want to, we have a lot of questions coming in. So I do want to get to two questions, then we're going to get to our regularly scheduled questions that we've talked about in conversation. We have a question, Rachel, for you on financing from Peter. He says, I'm with a factor where we require a notice of assignment from all buyers. It seems more and more big box retailers refuse to consider NOAs. Is this your experience? And if so, how do you get retailers to agree to NOAs?
We have payments coming to us from retailers all the time. We have not had a problem with that. It's really a change of where the payment goes. So the way we do things at Prestige is we try to be as streamlined and as not in your face as most other factors. meaning, of course, the payment from the retailer still has to go to us. But it's not like we stamp invoices and say this invoice must be remitted to Prestige. What we actually do is we have the client put a letter on their letterhead, let's say to Target, to the accounts payable department that says invoices should be paid to the following PO box. And that post office box is our bank lock box. That letter goes out one time. It goes out at the beginning of the relationship when they choose to sell us that particular customer. And that retailer knows now where the money goes. It's not a conversation. It's not an everyday thing. They're under notice. If the client gets the money sent to them because the account payable department didn't read that letter or didn't notice it, the client immediately has to remit the money to us. But it is not as cumbersome as some factors. And, our website, if you look at it, it says simple, fast, straightforward, flexible. The reason I joined this firm 14 years ago is because we have integrity and we do things differently. We are not a traditional factor. One of the things that is very unique about us is that we allow the client to pick and choose which accounts do you want to sell, which invoices do you want to sell? Do you need to use this every day? Do you need to use this weekly, seasonally, monthly? I jokingly call it an ATM machine for invoices because you can actually sell us what you need when you need it. And if you have months or seasons that you're just fine on your own liquidity, you don't have to sell us anything. So the question that was asked, I think, probably has to do with a very traditional, I'll call it a garment center factor, which is really very lightly, I'll say the word aggressive in how they work with your buyers at the retail level. And we don't do those kind of tactics. And that's why, our clients love us because we utilize ways to confirm invoices, like looking at through the EDI system and going through the portal, through the password that the client has, so that we don't have to bother your buyer to confirm invoices and things of that nature. And that's been a big reason that we're as successful as we are for 35 years, is we make it easy for the client to get financing without them worrying that, oh my God, my factor is going to ruin my relationship with my client.
Great. Vanessa, we have a lot of questions coming in for you. I'm going to ask a question that I've seen over and over again, which is, what's the best way to find a good sales broker?
Yeah, really good question. So I think the important thing to have first is your plan. What are the retailers you want to sell in and when? Because you want to map your sales brokers to those retailers. So for example, well, actually, just to continue along with that train of thought, every major retailer generally has a ecosystem of sales brokers that focuses on just that retailer. They know everything about that retailer from, who to contact in that company, not just the buyer, but, the people in AR and the marketing people and everything that you potentially need to get done within a retailer. They are your gateway. In addition to that, they'll know all the timelines that retailer has. There's a bazillion timelines with major retailers and all these grids that need to be filled out. So they can help lead you through all of that, as well as fill out a lot of those forms, and then also help you manage your sales performance and inventory with those retailers. So that is why you want to pick a sales broker that specializes in that given retailer. If there is a broker out there that tells you that they work with 4 different major retailers, run. At best, one sales broker company can support 2 retailers, and that is, a large organization. But if there is, a company that says they can do multiple and it's a small company, run. So, in addition to that, reaching out to sales brokers is a lot easier than reaching out to retail buyers. That said, you have to be ready to pitch to them, much like you would pitch to a buyer, right? Because they are kind of wearing the hat. Actually, many of them are former buyers. So they are really wearing the hat of the buyer that they work with when evaluating your brand. So go in there ready, pretend like this is the real, the actual retailer meeting. And, as long as you kind of, approach it that way with those tips in mind, you should be fine. So yeah, know what retailers you want to work with and when. Reach out to maybe 2 or 3 brokers that support that retailer, maybe a year and a half in advance of when you want to actually be in their stores. Begin working with them. They'll help you get ready for that retailer. They'll get you a line review. If they believe in you and can do it, they'll get you a line review with that buyer.
Wonderful. We have a lot of questions still to go. We're going to come back to them. So for those listeners who have not asked their questions, please keep them coming. We love hearing from you, and we'll make sure that we respond to as many as possible. I do want to come back to something that we talked about early on in the conversation, which is direct to consumer. We spent a little bit of time on the brick and mortar piece, but I want to come back to the direct to consumer. And we'll start with you, Vanessa, and then I would also like to get your thoughts on this, Rachel, as well, which is how important do you think it is to build one's business on direct to consumer before moving over to brick and mortar retail? Or do you think it's important to go directly to retailers? Vanessa, can you comment on that? And then I'd love to hear from you, Rachel, from a financing perspective, what you've seen.
Yeah, it makes so much good sense to launch and grow your business on DTC first before going into retailers. I mean, gosh, how much time do we have? Because I could probably forever and ever on many of the reasons why. But in short, DTC for you is an opportunity to test and learn before you get all of your product into retailer supply chains. In the first 6 to 12 months of any product's business, invariably, and I've seen so many startups, invariably you're changing something material about your product or your brand messaging or pricing or packaging. I mean, there is so much that gets changed in the first 6 to 12 months because you're getting feedback from consumers, you're evolving, you're iterating. So these are all good things. Like, you should be doing that. If you have not changed anything about what you're doing in the first 6 to 12 months, I would start there. There's a bigger problem there. But because of that, you want to actually be on DTC first, because this is your way to A/B test things, to learn firsthand from your consumers what's working and what's not working. All the while you're building relationships with your customers, right? You're building a CRM list, you're building a following on social media, and all of these things, these relationships, that direct relationships you're having with your customers is very valuable, because the day that you launch into retail, you want to activate your tribe to go buy product in that retailer, right? So there is never it's never wrong to be on DTC for as long as possible before you're ready for that next stage of growth. There are other advantages like cash flow, which I'm sure Rachel will talk to. Other advantages such as gaining negotiation leverage with your retailers. The bigger you are of a presence in DTC, the more retailers want you. Retailers are looking at DTC as kind of the filtering tool for what brands to bring into their stores. So, there's just some of the reasons why it makes good sense. But, Rachel, I'd love to hear from you as well.
Thank you. Well, I had a really fascinating call yesterday, which speaks exactly to this issue. A company who is selling a product, DTC, and it's an outdoor, like a camping sort of a thing. And he got approached by REI. And he wasn't wanting to or ready to or anything with retail, but he's like, whoa, I cannot leave this on the table. So they found him because he's getting great reviews, and now he's, has receivables to theoretically to sell to us. And, I said to him, like, take this and run, because, you have this traction. You have this retailer that's so interested in you. We can give you this runway. If they have you in X amount of stores and they want to take you further and wider, we can finance that growth. And he was like, oh, I didn't even know like this was a thing. Right. So that's something that's pretty exciting. We definitely see many more companies coming to us that are e-commerce companies, and they get introduced to us by the banker or their advisor, and they say, okay, so I'm an e-commerce company, but I am exploring selling to retail, or I have some orders coming up for retail, and I want to make sure I'm positioned, and I'm not ready yet, but I want to know now, how does it work, and how will I funded and how quickly does this happen and all those sort of questions. And, you know, I love talking to companies like that because they're proactive in their growth and they're trying to figure it out. And, you know, I love putting people in touch with one another, as everybody knows. So, you know, I may speak to somebody and say, okay, but, you know, then you need to speak to Vanessa to really figure out your numbers and your strategy and so on. And then there's people within my network. I actually have a group, which is a consumer products group. It's a network, it's a brain trust. And we connect each other. You know, hey, you need to know this thing, speak to this person. And so it is really important to gain knowledge before you just go out there and, you know, go to DTC or go to retail. You want advisors that can really pave the way for you. And Vanessa and I either are that person or we know those people.
And
So
I would say even like, I remember, you know, back when I was running a company and I was out looking for debt financing as well and speaking with people like Rachel, like you interview the CEOs of these companies and, you know, your ability to kind of prove to people like Rachel that you have a tried and true, you know, brand and product, that there is demand, that it is a viable business, your ability to use your DTC, you know, experience and data to kind of show that proof to people like Rachel is really, I thought it was really important. And I mean, you might have an opinion as well, Rachel, but right, like how do you evaluate credibility, and does DTC play into that?
I don't need them to sell to DTC to come through my door. I need them to have invoices. And the most important thing I need them to have is either business sense
Mhm.
or somebody who is their advisor in the company that does have that. What I have found is a lot of founders who are creating a product at their kitchen table, they come to our door and they don't understand the first thing about finance and they don't have somebody for me to speak to who understands it. And it's not a complicated process. I mean, as I explained, it's literally the concept of an ATM machine for invoices. But if I say like a simple thing that you don't understand and you don't have an advisor or partner or something, I don't have the bandwidth to take care of you because I have a lot of other clients pulling and, you know, you need to do your homework. You need to have somebody who, yeah, maybe you're paying, maybe it's an accounting firm who, you know, it is worth their weight in gold for them to be the person who gets on the phone with me. And you need to spend some money to make some money. And the mistakes that you're going to make by not having a person like that, either as your partner, your advisor, a paid consultant, it's going to come back to bite you. So, you know, just because you made a product at your kitchen table and somehow somebody found you and wants it, you really need to have a business sense or somebody that does when you're approaching a finance company or anybody else.
Thank you. I want to take a couple more questions. We have about 10 minutes left. We're going to come back to our scheduled programming, but we really have gotten some great questions. I do want to acknowledge, we mentioned Lauren Francis at the beginning of this call. Lauren has a question on where are the biggest opportunities right now for beauty brands. And I know both of you have specialized in the beauty segment. So if you can address that, that would be great.
So I will assume that that question is which retailers present the biggest opportunities in beauty right now. So assuming that that question is correct, or that my understanding is correct. I mean, the biggest opportunities may not always be the best. And I say that because biggest inherently means they have the widest, the broadest door count, and they get tons of sales velocity. And that's Walmart, right? But if your brand is a higher end premium brand, it may not make sense to go after Walmart right now. It may make sense, you know, 5 or 10 years down the road. So, you know, by biggest, it doesn't always, you know, be strategic, I think is kind of my point. Your best opportunity, your biggest opportunity is the one that aligns with your brand the best and is, you know, meeting your financial goals, whether it's from a top line revenue standpoint or from a, you know, profitability standpoint. But, you know, Ulta remains to be a phenomenal retailer for beauty. They've been performing well on Wall Street. Their real estate kind of footprint and strategy really works well with COVID. They've been, you know, bringing in innovative brands at a really rapid pace. They're a phenomenal retailer, I think. So that is, you know, I guess another way of thinking about opportunity.
Yeah, I would say, again, to reiterate what Vanessa's saying, what is your product? What is its price point? Who's your market? One of our clients sells a hair accessory, shout out to the Puff Cuff. And they, were selling in Sally Beauty, and Seattle won, the President's Award for Innovative New Product. And so, if that's a product that's for Sally Beauty, then that's where you want to sell it. If it's a product that is, targeted to a mass retailer like a Target, maybe that's where to sell it. So you need to know your price point. You need to know your market. You need to know, do you want to be a luxury brand? Do you want to be an everyday brand? And maybe you want to be in CVS. Maybe that's your price point. So figure out, who you want to be, and then, target that.
Wonderful. We are continuing to get a lot of questions. I want to give a chance, Vanessa, to you to answer one more, and then Rachel to answer one more, and then we'll get into a couple of things, how to get in touch with us, etc. So Rebecca asks, is there any small print in wholesale contracts that we should be really careful about that can present large risks for small businesses?
So in doing business with major retailers, there's tons of print to the terms and conditions, but you have very little negotiating room to change them. What generally happens is you will first get a kind of a summary of terms, a deal sheet of sorts. And these are the things that are negotiable. So for instance, how much are you willing to pay for markdowns? How much you're willing to fund for this and that? And then everything else outside of that, outside of those numbers that they're willing to negotiate, those are set terms. You have to abide by them. And if you don't want to, you can walk away, right? I mean, so there is no fine print that is there to trick you. You have to read it all, and no, not many of them are negotiable, unfortunately.
Okay. Rachel, there has been a couple of questions related to purchase orders and purchase order financing. I know we didn't touch on that, but if you could just talk a little bit about purchase order financing and how that fits into all of this, that would be awesome.
Yeah, so we mentioned before how it fits in. If you are producing your product overseas and you need to pay for the product prior to them releasing it, then you're going to want to reach out to us at Prestige, and we will pick the perfect partner based on your size and other items to fund your purchase order with a letter of credit. And then that company gets paid back by Prestige when we buy the invoice. So we pay back for the purchase order financing plus their fees when we purchase the invoice. And so we had discussed that before. And again, if it's a domestic supplier, then they want to use our factors assurance program if they need to pay quickly and don't have, terms that really work well for them.
Great. So I think we have time for one or two more questions. And then, as I said, we'll get to the how to contact you both. But I would love to understand a little bit more about how this works for potentially service companies. So there's someone who has asked a question: how do you sell services? This is a music supplier, for example, to retailers.
So if it is something other than merchandise, there is an entirely different team within retailers that handles this. It is a procurement team. And yeah, they will procure everything else not related to merchandise. I don't know much about how they make decisions or how they operate. It's a very different team than what I worked in as a buyer at Target. It's probably the same structure in most major retailers, very different department. So that's all I know.
Okay.
Yeah. And at Prestige, just as an FYI, I mean, we don't just fund product related businesses, we can fund service receivables as well. So, we fund pretty much all industries. And if you go on our website later, you'll see all the categories we finance, but service industries are welcome as well.
Wonderful. There's a question from an anonymous attendee about using a manufacturing representative when trying to get into major retailers like Target. Can you address that, Vanessa?
Yeah, so there are many names for these people: vendor reps, manufacturer reps, sales brokers. They're all the same. There's just many different names in which we call them. So yeah, all of my earlier comments regarding sales brokers applies as well to vendor and manufacturer reps.
Great. And Rachel, we will close out one additional question for you. And that is around, and this is from, Tatiana. Can you provide more detail? And I think you did a little bit about what makes a good fit for accounts receivable financing, and maybe talk a little bit about the size of the contract that you need to start with and how big you can go up to as well.
Okay, thank you. So at Prestige Capital, we finance businesses with a sales size of annual sales, 2 million up to 300 million of annual sales, which is a huge range. For a client to walk through our door and begin funding, we want to be able to see that you have roughly 200,000 in receivables. Either you shipped 100 and you're about to ship another 100, or you are about to ship 100 and right after that, the next month, there's another 100. So that's the size that we're looking for. And we can take those receivables and, as I said, really create a runway for growth. So if you have a great product and they're starting off with you 100, 200,000, and then they want to expand, don't be fearful of expansion, because we will just keep funding invoices as they grow, And for us, if you approach us and you're like a little too small for us, we may refer you to a colleague that might help you now and then come back to us later. So there are definitely companies that will fund a smaller, receivable. It could be 20,000, it could be 10,000. It's not going to be Prestige. But, for us, we're looking for that growth of, 2 million to 300 million of a size company.
Awesome. And Vanessa, is it possible in 1 minute that you can talk about staying on retail shelves and what you need to do to stay there?
Yep, absolutely. So earlier I had mentioned it's really important to understand what the retail buyer's expectations are for your sales velocity. So remembering that once they tell you that information, do everything in your power to drive those sales, right? Use marketing in and out store to drive those sales. That is your number one way of staying on shelf. And then the second piece is don't mess up with your shipments and fulfillment, right? Get your supply chain squeaky clean and make sure everything's delivered flawlessly and in good shape, and you will stay out of the crosshairs of the retail buyers.
Thank you. This was really a riveting conversation. I know we packed a lot into the hour. If you can give information on how to contact you so that they can ask more questions and get in touch with you. We'll also put this in the chat as well. So Rachel, can you start and just let people know how they can contact you?
Sure. So it's Prestige Capital. That's the website. And you can reach me at my email, which is rhersh, HERSH, @prestigecapital.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, Rachel Hersh on LinkedIn. And I look forward to hearing from people. Thanks.
And then for myself, I will start by saying I am not a sales broker. So, if you are interested in reaching out, I don't help in that capacity. What I am is a fractional chief marketing officer that just happens to have been a retail buyer in a previous life. But to contact me, you can reach me at one of my websites, which is retail-path.com. So retail-path.com. And on that website, you'll also find tools and templates, all of my retail pitch deck templates, email templates to buyers, all that stuff can be found there. And just for you guys, I have a coupon code for you for 20% off any of those template purchases. And so the coupon code is Prestige20. So Prestige as in Prestige Capital, Prestige20, no space.
Thank you, Vanessa. That's great.
Yeah.
I'll just say the email address one more time because I know my name is often misspelled. It's Hirsch as in Hershey bar. So there is no C. So it's RHERSH at prestigecapital.com. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you for everybody for joining us. We'll be sending a follow-up and we'll try to get to all those questions that you asked. We're greatly appreciative of all the participation today.
Thank you, Samantha, for hosting, and thank you, Vanessa, for co-hosting with me. This was wonderful, and look forward to hearing from everyone.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.